Well, thank you everyone for joining us. We will be discussing today what it's like to actually go through a CMMC assessment and what it's like to go through a CMMC Level 2 assessment if you want to become a C3PAO. Together with me today is Chris Haye from Meerkat Cyber. Chris, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you. I am a certified instructor, certified assessor, been in the CMMC ecosystem since its earliest stages, wrote some of the earliest materials, and did the provisional assessor instructor path from one of the earliest classes offered. Currently, we are a C3PAO at Meerkat, and we have a team of about 8 assessors that we built up, many of them leads, and our track record so far in guiding clients toward their assessments is 13 assessments, 13 perfect scores, and counting, hoping to keep that average.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good. It's a nice batting average. So you and I have been working on and talking about CMMC Level 2 assessment for probably 3 years now. And then just recently, within, I would say the last 5 months, you all went through on your own, right? So there was so much theory and thinking about it beforehand. And first of all, talk about the lead up. When you were actually doing it, what was the lead up to that that assessment like, and how did you and your organization prepare for it?
So, like many organizations out there, we did not have an enclave or even information system that would be remotely compliant. If you're on commercial, it's not going to be compliant, Microsoft commercial. So we set up a new enclave for performing assessments exactly. And that's what the DoD wants to come in and assess. DIBCAC specifically, they want to see that enclave that you've created to go and perform assessments as a C3PAO. Well, that needs to pass all of the level 2 requirements that a CMMC organization seeking certification would have to pass. So we set it up in exactly the same way we've counseled our clients and set theirs up. And we chose GCC, and we added one software outside of the Microsoft stack, and that is XQ.
Oh, well, thank you. Appreciate that.
Technology.
Yeah. Oh, so I'll come back to XQ because I'd love to know why you added that. But what was the most surprising thing heading into the assessment? Like, what was the hardest thing about getting ready for it?
The documentation is a huge lift. And if I were to say anybody else heading into an assessment, what would be the biggest lift? That is it. However, because we prepared so many clients in this space, we had a pretty good start with documentation, but it's hundreds, if not thousands of pages of documentation needed.
Thousands.
So
Wow.
it is something that I've never seen an OSC say, we're ready from the start. It's okay, here's what we have right now, and maybe they have an SSP and that might be it. And everything else needed to be created from scratch. In our case, again, we already had, we've spent years creating policies and documentation. So we had that base for us, but that is a lift, even if you've been doing this for a while, and all of those practitioners out there know it. Every client that walks in the door, it's not 2 hours and you've got a policy pack. It's possibly hundreds of hours to get your policy pack ready.
Yeah. So I've heard you mention before that one of the most difficult things about the documentation itself is the fact that it has to match up exactly to your environment.
Yes.
And can you talk a little bit about that? And you have an enclave. What did you decide to put in the enclave? What was outside the enclave? Does anything ever come out that you're worried about? Like, what is that like, and how does it apply to the documentation?
So as everybody knows who's been through this, the scope of your environment is a critical thing. The fewer people and the fewer aspects of your company that you need to have certified, the better off you are. What does that mean? Well, if you've got 100 people working for your company, but only 5 of them are handling COI, which is what kicks you into a level 2 assessment, you probably don't want to drag all 100 people into that level 2 environment. You probably want to take 5 and make a special enclave just for those 5 people. Well, those 5 people, to be fully compliant with CMMC, are going to have their own set of rules and their own way that they have to do business, and it is restrictive. So it's not great when you roll that up company-wide to a bunch of people who don't need all those restrictions on their daily efforts to get work done. So that's the first thing, is set up a small scope, if at all possible. And we took, here's how many assessors we're going to have on a team. Let's set up a scope that includes those assessors' computers, and that's it. And we put everybody in a GCC cloud environment, rolled out XQ, and that is as limited as our stack is Microsoft, and use only the software needed. And that's a good thing in CMMC, is limit it to only what you need to get your job done. So we're, in our case, Office, and then put XQ as an extra layer of security for when we need to share files and share email, and off to the races. That's what we needed.
Great. That's really interesting. Chris, did you have an MSP?
We did not. In most cases, I would encourage one. We did not, because we had some very technically skilled assessors in our staff that could actually function as an MSP. But in almost every case for our clients, we recommend an MSP to them, or they come with an MSP. And always, we hope that that MSP has an assessor trained level of staff, that they understand CMMC, because anything less than that, it's going to be challenging.
So what does it mean for an organization to have an MSP and then work with you? I guess that someone like you will either help them prepare the documentation, or you can be the C3PAO that does the assessment. But what specific things does a MSP need to be responsible for within that, like heading into the assessment, and then through the assessment, and then post-assessment?
These are really great questions, and they're critical that your MSP is able to answer them, because if they don't know exactly what they're doing as it relates to CMMC, and if they don't have a shared responsibility matrix that exactly points out under the CMMC framework, here are the controls that we are handling for you, they're going to have a rough day at the assessment, which means you're going to have a rough day at the assessment. So essentially, what can they do? Anything that your MSP wants to help you on underneath the 110 controls, they are certainly an asset in many of these. Now, some of the stuff they will probably not be able to help you at all on, but some do, like training. Your employees will need to go through CUI training. They'll need to go through security awareness training. Maybe MSP offers that. Many of them don't. But there are other things like logging, auditing, setting up new users, configuring your configurations for the enclave, configuring new machines. All these things MSPs will actively want to help you with. And likewise, they will be pulled into the assessment when that control comes up. Tell me how you do this. Well, that's when you hand it over to your MSP. And you don't have to answer that question, because you've got a guy.
You've got a guy. That's good. When we were speaking with people, I would say 99% of them are coming from commercial cloud and need to move into GCC, and they want to avoid GCC high, right? And I think that you had talked about the fact that you guys chose GCC instead of GCC high. First of all, can you talk a little bit about why you chose GCC versus GCC high?
GCC has some advantages, including for a lot of small and medium-sized companies, it's an advantage. You don't have to pay that big GCC high bill a year in advance. So if I have 10 users and you're looking at a $90 package per month per user, multiply that times a year, you've got a really large chunk that you have to come up with upfront before you even start to configure the tenant to get compliant. So that doesn't sit well with everybody. And there's no other way to get GCC high other than you pay for it for a year in advance upfront. That's one significant incentive to go on GCC. Who can do that? In most cases, the guidance will tell you that the GCC high was created to have US eyes only and US customer service support only. And so the reason you'd need that is if you are dealing with any kind of CUI that's specified that you can't have foreigners looking at it, that would be an example, or ITAR controlled things. However, there are ways, and we have written some language to this, that you could still satisfy ITAR and those no foreign restrictions if structured properly under GCC. And by that, I mean, if you do use XQ to further restrict access to data, you've satisfied the same objective as moving it all to GCC High, because you've made it so nobody else outside of your company can access that sensitive data.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. That's one of the things that we run into. Folks that have CMMC requirements and ITAR requirements, but don't want to move to GCC High, can do it with XQ and GCC Moderate. Let's move into the actual assessment itself and what that experience was like for you. So what caught you by surprise? Did anything happen that you're like, oh, I didn't see that one coming?
Yes. And it is, I think, a testament to we're in a space that is new for everybody, even the assessors. And our assessment was performed by 6 DIBCAC assessors from the DoD. And it was interesting to see that there are some differences of opinion even among them. Here's one of the things that I think one of the leading assessors, I won't say he was the lead, there seemed to be 2 that were basically deferred to by the other 4. There are total 6 assessors. 2 of them seemed to be the ones that kind of, when they spoke, the other ones just were like, yeah, what he said. And one of the gentlemen came to the control that is all about collaborative computing devices. And those are specifically, as I read the assessment guide, devices that you would bolt on a wall and hold meetings, like a Zoom meeting. And it has a video camera somewhere, either separate or as part of the device. And what the exact requirement is that that has an indicator light on it so that you know when you're being recorded. And there should be some kind of a way that anybody in the room can say, oh yeah, look, somebody turned on our collaborative computing device. And one of the ways, as I referenced earlier, to keep your assessment simple is to limit the scope. And we said, we're not going to have collaborative computing devices inside of our enclave. We're not going to allow those meeting rooms with cameras, et cetera, on the wall. So our SSP and our policies said, not allowed. Here's where the surprise came. We're getting through that control in the assessment, and the assessor, one of the guys that was more of a lead, said, you say here you don't use collaborative computing devices. Nope, we don't. We don't have anything. We don't even have a conference room. Well, do you use Teams? Well, yes. He said, isn't that a collaborative computing device? And that was a surprise to me. That is the first assessor I've ever spoken to. And I've taught over 80 and spoken to hundreds of assessors, and kind of not always on this subject, but we bounce a lot of ideas and question each other on topics like this. First one I've ever heard that read that control to mean a piece of software, not a hardware on the wall. So here's what I do, trying to delicately respond to this. I pulled up the assessment guide and shared my screen and said, wow, I mean, you guys are the experts, but I'm trying to understand how to read this as a piece of software. And so we go through the control, and I come to the part where, you know, everything to me kind of says this is a device. By the way, device is in the title of control. And he didn't move. So he basically said, the way I see it, Teams is a clever device, and you're going to have to change your documentation to reflect that you're using Teams. And we did. So that didn't fail us. But that was definitely a surprise to me.
And then, does that have any impact on VDIs? Because you have your laptop here, the VDI is in the cloud, but the device is still interfacing with it. It's just an extension of Teams. Does that change your interpretation of the extension, the perimeter of scope?
So in 32 CFR, VDIs were specifically carved out of the scope. And if you configure it properly, which means you really just have control of the mouse, you have a keyboard, and you have the screen, then that is out of scope. It is interestingly still debated that once you turn on the video, that now you can possibly see what I've got on my wall over here. Yeah. And now you can see CUI inside a facility? Does that bring things into scope and even the computer into scope? People are arguing over that currently. Again, we're in the earliest stages where people are still, we're watching the initial sausage get made. But
Wow.
in my opinion, Teams does not bring that VDI in scope. That VDI is out of scope. You ask somebody else and they may think differently. These things we're working out in the ecosystem, and it is an interesting process.
We'll have to see how that one resolves. So what would you recommend to someone in terms of assessor interaction? So they come up with something and say, oh, this doesn't look right. What is the proper way to handle that as an organization so as not to aggravate the assessor and to, have a smooth continuation and a successful
The word diplomatic comes to mind for me.
Yeah.
And that is exactly what I thought about our assessment with the DoD and their assessor team, is absolutely respectful, absolutely diplomatic to them, because they, at the end of the day, reserve the sole ability to say you fail or you pass. So everything is with all due respect. I'm trying to understand your position. As I approached this particular topic with that assessor, I said, look, I'm an instructor and an assessor myself, and I want to make sure that I'm teaching other people what the position is of the DoD. So please help me understand your position. And, you push back gently on their interpretation if you think there's room to push back, and I did. But at the end of the day, they get to decide. The assessor assessing you is going to decide whether or not you pass or fail. And so treat that with all the respect it deserves. You can hopefully have somebody else that is in the assessment with you that is not exactly your organization. And I highly recommend this. I liken it to, you don't want to go to trial without your attorney. You don't want to go to an assessment without the people that guided you there. And hopefully it was a team of assessors. So we go to all of our assessments with all of our clients, insist that we're going to be there. And why? Because on their behalf, they don't have to be the bad cop. We will be the bad cop. We can say, oh, wait, I'm sorry, assessor. What did you say? And help me understand that position so that we can try to unpack wherever rabbit hole or whatever this assessor is going down to see if we can get them back on track. And it doesn't always work. We do have some assessors out there that have differing opinions. But to the extent you can, again, delicately, diplomatically argue, that's what the goal is.
It brings to mind, I'm going to say this wrong, but that's you brought up the whole go to trial thing. Like only a fool has himself as a client, as an attorney or something like that. Yeah. So costs are a huge issue for everyone that we talk to. Most of the defense industrial base is, between 10 and 100 people, right? Yep. What should people expect realistically in terms of like the gap analysis, the remediation, the SSP creation, the cost to actually go through with a C3PAO, including the DIBCAT costs, and then like the ongoing, like what is this is it worth it for folks, I guess?
You have to do a business decision to decide if it's worth it. But I can give you some average quotes out there, average numbers that we're seeing in the industry. Redspin did an analysis that was pretty recent, and I can get those exact numbers to you, but I can tell you ballparks right now. Also, Summit 7 has done some surveys of the DIB and come up with some numbers. Summit 7 has always said this is a 6-digit problem, and they have found the average OSC, organization seeking certification, will spend $150,000 or more to get compliant. And then you've got the assessment on top of that. We have never had a client that costs that much to get compliant, but there are some, I'm sure. We think it could be done for less than 6 figures, and keep shopping if somebody gave you a quote that was 300,000 or more, because unless you're Microsoft or Boeing, you probably could get by with a much smaller budget than that. So that's opinion number one. On assessments themselves, here's the biggest part you need to be wary of. Most C3PAOs are booking out 6 to 9 months right now. So that is driving two things. One, your timeline may not be what you think it is. If you're thinking, oh, I'm going to work on getting fully compliant by May, and then I'm going to reach out to a C3PAO and get assessed this summer, that ship sailed. Most likely a C3PAO is not going to be able to get you scheduled by this summer, even if you called today. That being said, we are onboarding more and more. I think we're up to 98 C3PAOs as of last night's town hall. So the ecosystem is starting to bear a little bit more, but we also have only 1%, less than 1% of the DIB has been assessed. So we've got many, many, many more to do. Turning to costs of an assessment, not the timing. So the timing is a big issue, but costs are an issue as well. I have heard of sub $40,000 assessments, but it's in a very limited type of customer, usually 100% virtual, small enclave, maybe it's completely cloud-based, less than 5 people. I've never heard regularly assessments falling underneath 40. Most C3PAOs are charging 45 to 65 is kind of the going rate right now. And it's multi-factored as far as why and what the range is. How many users? How many locations do you have that need to be assessed? Are we going to numerous locations? Do we have to fly around the country? Or are you completely cloud-based and you have no facility to go and assess? Are you using VDIs, which wipes out almost all of your user base, if not everybody? And then I'm just assessing the cloud structure itself. I don't even have to worry about the endpoints. That's a different assessment. So there are ways to get the costs down and to get it on that lower end of the bracket, but you have to be well advised and be wise about how you set up your enclave to get that lower end.
Yeah. What is the easiest way to fail an assessment?
I used to say documentation. That still may be true, but the DIB is starting to get a little bit more educated, and we do need a lot of education. And hopefully there are many more of these where we can help the DIB understand what's needed. But the documentation part of it, as recently as 3 or 4 months ago, we had a client come in who was walking into her assessment and they said, "You're not ready, sorry," and come back another day. This is what's called phase 1 in the CMMC assessment process, or the CAP. Phase 1, you sit down and look at the document and say, "Are you ready?" They said, "You're not ready." And she's like, "Why?" "Well, you don't have an SSP." She was told, amazingly, by somebody in the ecosystem that she doesn't need an SSP. Well, that is actually one of the controls. You need it's required. You need an SSP. And to have people who are out there advising customers, you don't need an SSP. Yeah, that's, of course you're going to fail an assessment. And she was told, you will fail the assessment if you don't go get some better advice here. So documentation is still a huge factor, and the SSP is not the only thing you should walk in with. It really is going to be hundreds of pages, if not thousands of pages of documentation, because everything, every configuration and everything you do needs to be documented. So the other most common way beyond documentation that people are failing assessments is the way they do it doesn't align with the documentation. And that's critical. The assessor is going to look at your documentation and say, okay, show me how you're doing this. And they need to be in perfect alignment. So if it's, how many times somebody logs in or attempts to log in with a wrong password and it locks them out, they may test that. The assessor may say, show me, you told me it was going to be 5 times, and then they're locked out till they call in an admin. Show me how that works. And I've seen an assessor test that. If it doesn't exactly reflect what's in your policy, in that example 5 times, you could fail that assessment because the way you've configured is not aligned with the way you told the DoD you're going to do it. And that screams, I don't even know my own ecosystem.
That's really valuable advice. One last question.
Yeah. Okay, and then I got to jump, sorry.
I know. Some folks are not convinced that they need a CMMC level 2 assessment for an award. What would you say to them?
That could be true right now. Stay tuned.
I thought that everything after November 10th had to have it.
So no, we are in a phased roll-in, and right now there are some that can self-attest that they are level 2. But stay tuned, because as 32 CFR said, when a contracting officer or program manager at the DoD says, you know what, my project needs certification, that's it. That whole contract, anything that they're handling, it's going to require certification all the way down, all the subcontractors.
Yeah. They actually just built it into GSA in January as well, that it's not officially CMMC, but it's essentially all the CMMC controls. I know you've got to go. Thank you so much for your time. This was so valuable. Really appreciate it. And congratulations once again on achieving your CMMC level 2 certification and your C3PAO status.
Thank you.
Have a great
Keep up the good work.
Yeah, you too. Have a great day.
Thanks. Bye.